Many people feel a little bit frustrated when they're navigating the spiritual life. They're trying to understand, well, how can I have a personal relationship with Christ? And I just wanted to read out something here that might be of help with somebody. I know it's 16 minutes. It's a bit long, but take the time to listen to this, and I'll just give you, a little bit of my explanation on this so that you can further understand how you can proceed in the spiritual life and how you can know Christ better, which is really important, and understand what Christ is trying to do in your life. Because this relationship goes both ways. Christ wants to have a relationship with us. So anyway, have a listen to this, and then I'll just talk a little bit about this after this video. We pointed out above that the law of the Tower of Babel is universal, i.e. that it works both in individual biography and in humanity, and even in other hierarchies. The point of this law is that all autonomous activity from below inevitably meets with divine reality above. What one has built through the autonomous effort of the lower self must sooner or later be confronted with divine reality and undergo the effects of comparison with it. The law of the Tower of Babel is manifest, for example, in the fact of purgatory after death. For every man who is not a saint or fully righteous, man builds a kind of Tower of Babel which is his own. His actions, opinions and aspirations, autonomous or personal, constitute a private world which he has built and that he bears within himself into the spiritual world after his death. This subjective world must there pass through the trial of being the trans-subjective spiritual reality, the thunderbolt. And this meeting of subjectivity with spiritual reality is the essence of post-mortem stage known by the name purgatory. Purgatory is therefore the state of the soul where the actions, opinions and aspirations of the past life are seen in the true light of transsubjective consciousness. No one judges it. It is the soul itself who judges itself in the light of a completely awakened conscience. One often speaks of the darkness into which the soul is plunged on entering purgatory, and also of the solitary confinement that it undergoes there. There is truth in these descriptions of the state of the soul in purgatory, but it is necessary firstly to understand them in order to be able to rightly appreciate their truth. Seen from without, a soul who enters the state of purgatory disappears from the sight of other souls and is thus plunged into the darkness of invisibility and inaccessibility. It is in this sense, i.e., in the sense of being inaccessible, that one can certainly say that the soul in purgatory undergoes confinement. For the soul is then outside the contacts and relationships from the free beings of the spiritual world. But seen from within, a soul who enters into purgatory is plunged into absolute light of transsubjective consciousness, which, being so luminous, seems to envelop and make the soul so concentrated as to become inaccessible to everyone. Concerning how the purification of the soul in purgatory takes place, the nature of the darkness and confinement of the state of purgatory, and lastly the fruits of this state, no one is given a clearer idea and a more convincing description, being found on authentic experience, than that given by St. John of the Cross in his Dark Night of the Soul. In the chapters where he deals with the dark night of the spirit, we find an analogy that is as close as possible to the state of the soul in purgatory, the experience described being in every way analogous to the experience of purification that a soul undergoes in purgatory. The dark night is a certain inflowing of God into the soul, which cleanses it of its ignorances and imperfections, habitual, natural, and spiritual. But it may be asked, why does the soul call the divine light, which enlightens the soul and purges it of its ignorances, the dark night? I reply that the divine wisdom is, for two reasons, not night and darkness only, but pain and torment also to the soul. The first is that the divine wisdom is so high that it transcends the capacity of the soul, and therefore is, in that respect, darkness. The second reason is based on the meanness and impurity of the soul, and in that respect, the divine wisdom is painful to it, afflictive, and dark also. To prove the truth of the first reason, we take for granted a principle of the philosopher, namely, the more clear and evident divine things are, the more dark and hidden they are to the soul naturally. Thus, the more clear the light, the more does it blind the eyes of the owl. And the stronger the sun's rays, the more it blinds the visual organs, overcoming them by reason of their weakness and depriving them of the power of seeing. So the divine light of contemplation, when it beats on the soul, not yet perfectly enlightened, causes spiritual darkness, because it not only surpasses its strengths, but because it blinds it and deprives it of its natural perceptions. This is the reason why the illuminating ray of hidden wisdom, when God sends it from himself into the soul, not yet transformed, produces thick darkness in the understanding. The soul, by reason of its impurity, suffers exceedingly when the divine light really shines upon it. And when the rays of this pure light strike upon the soul in order to expel its impurities, the soul perceives itself to be so unclean and miserable that it seems as if God has set himself against it, and itself were set against God. So grievous and painful is this feeling, for it thinks now that God has abandoned it. That is one of the heaviest afflictions of Job during his trial. Why hast thou set me contrary to thee, and I become burdensome to myself? Job 7:20. The soul, seeing distinctly in this bright and pure light, though dimly, its own impurity, acknowledges its own unworthiness before God and all creatures. That which pains it still more is the fear it has that it never will be worthy, and that all its goodness is gone. In the second place, the pain of the soul comes from its natural moral and spiritual weakness. For when this divine contemplation strikes it with a certain vehemence, in order to strengthen it and subdue it, it is then so pained in weakness as also to faint away. For sense and spirit, as if under heavy and gloomy burdens, suffer and groan in agony so great that death, annihilation itself, would be a desired relief. This is a thing wonderful and piteous. So great are the weaknesses and purity of the soul, that the hand of God, so gentle, so soft and so gentle, is felt to be so heavy and oppressive, though neither pressing nor resting on it, but merely touching it. That too, most mercifully, does he touch the soul, not to chastise it, but to load it with his graces. Dark Night 2. A sunbeam coming in by a window is perceived the less distinctly, the more pure and free from atoms and motes the air is. But the more of these there are, the more distinct the beam to the eye. The reason is that we do not see light itself, but by means of which we see the objects on which it falls, and these reflecting it, the light itself becomes a visible object. Had it not struck itself, it would itself remain invisible. Thus this ray of divine contemplation, transcending as it does the natural powers, striking the soul with its divine light, makes it dark and deprives it of all natural affections and apprehensions which it previously entertained in its own natural light. Under these circumstances, the soul is left not only in darkness, but in emptiness also, as to its powers and desires, both natural and spiritual. And in this emptiness and darkness is purified and enlightened by the divine spiritual light. But it does not imagine that it has it. Yea, rather, it thinks itself to be in darkness, as we have said of the sunbeam, which, though passing through the middle of the room, cannot be seen if the air is quite pure and there are no objects on which it may fall. However, the spiritual light falling on the soul, if there is anything to reflect it, that is, upon any matter, however small, of perfection, which presents itself to the understanding, or a decision to be made as to the truth or falsehood of anything. The soul sees it at once and understands the matter more clearly than it ever did before it entered into darkness. In the same way, the soul discerns the spiritual light which is given it, that it may easily recognize its own imperfection. The divine fire of contemplative love, which, before it unites with and transforms the soul into itself, purges away all the contrary qualities. It expels its impurities, blackens it and obscures it, and thus its condition is apparently worse than it was before, more impure and offensive. For while the divine purgation is removing all the evil and vicious rumours which, because so deeply rooted and settled in the soul, were neither seen nor felt, but now, in order to effect their expulsion and annihilation, are rendered clearly visible in the dim light of divine contemplation, the soul, though not worse in itself, nor in the sight of God, seeing at last what it never saw before, looks upon itself not only as unworthy of his regard, but even as loathsome object, and that God does loathe it. The light of God, which illumines an angel, enlightens him and sets him on fire with love, for he is a spirit already prepared for the infusion of that light. But man, being impure and weak, is ordinarily enlightened, as I said before, in darkness, in distress and pain. The sun's rays are painful in their light to weak eyes, till the fire of love, purifying him, shall be spiritualized and refined him, so that, being made pure, he may be able to receive with sweetness, like the angels, the union of inflowing love. This is all from St. John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul 2. 5, 8, 10, 12. The foregoing extracts from The Dark Night of the Soul from chapters 5, 8, 10, 12 of Book 2 concerning the Dark Night of the Spirit are the most relevant here in the doctrine of St. John of the Cross. The purification portrayed in these extracts amounts to a school of humility, and the divine light present here, which puts the soul in darkness and bears down on it by making it experience the weight of the inevitable necessity of confrontation of human nature with divine truth, can be summarized by the image of the tower blasted by the thunderbolt and the fall of its constructors. The thunderbolt which blasts is the divine light which dazzles and bears down. The blasted tower is what the human powers of understanding, imagination, and will have erected, which find themselves confronted with divine reality. The constructors who fall represent the school of humility for human powers of understanding, imagination, and will. Purgatory, the way of purification which precedes illumination and mystical union. The great historical events which have had the effect that mankind had to begin again. Lastly, the events in biographies of individuals where the latter were overwhelmed by a thunderbolt blast in order to rise again from it, either being illumined like Saul of Tarsus or alienated like Nietzsche. All these things which appear so different are only diverse manifestations of the same law, that the tower blasted by the thunderbolt. It is this law which is the theme of the Magnificat, and that I push at the head of this letter, which is, it is said, he has scattered those who are proud thoughts in their hearts. He has put down the mighty from their thrones. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty-handed. It is the eternal law of the Tower of Babel which is sung in the Magnificat, the law of the tower blasted by the thunderbolt, and of the humble heart raised by the same thunderbolt to divine illumination. For the Magnificat is the song of the heart struck by this very thunderbolt, which puts down the mighty from their thrones and exalts those of low degree. So that's just an example from St. John of the Cross as regards what we term the dark night of the soul, which is God trying to purify us. Oftentimes in our lives, we're looking for God. We're all looking for God. We've built our towers of Babel, such our towers of our own making in our lives. This is metaphorical. So in our lives, I've built my tower, and I'm looking for God, and God is saying, well, if you want to encounter me, you need to step down from what you have built to encounter me. You have to let yourself be struck by his power. And to kind of bring this down to nuts and bolts, to a very practical way of allowing yourself to know God more, to have that personal relationship with God as Catholics. One of the first ways is confession. Confession. How many people are so proud that they are incapable of actually physically going to confession. It's amazing, such a simple act. No, I don't think I can. I need to do that. I confess my sins to God. Blah blah blah. It's fascinating, but it's this simple act of humility. This is the school of humility that God wants to bring us through. And so, we have Our Lady as really the example of the school of humility. When we pray the rosary, she takes us by her hand, and she leads us into that school of humility, to allow ourselves to be purified. Because everything that Christ speaks to us in his gospel, in a sense, is a method of purification. What he asks us to do is a method of purification. When the rich young man came to him and he said, what do I need to do to be perfect? Christ gave him, he speaks to him on, follow the law and the commandments and so. And he said, I've done all of these things. Well, you lack one thing. Go and sell everything and give it to the poor and come follow me. And he wasn't able to do that. He wasn't able to make that final step of purification that our Lord asked him, so that he could know Christ more. Now, not all of us are called to sell everything in that sense, but if you can't even, some people, Christ is asking very little of us, and we're not able to do that very little. For example, confession, to go to confession, to feed the poor, help the poor, pray with others. To deny ourselves, to study the faith more, to live the gospel, to read the catechism. You can think of lots of examples. We all have our towers that we live in a sense. We all build up things that we think are going to hold us secure, and at the end of the day, they don't. Money. So many people build their towers of wealth, of money, all of which will be destroyed before death. All of them. No amount of money will get you into heaven. And yet so many people place so much faith in those things. They place so much faith in those than in actually God. So, I mean, it's just an encouragement for people to step into that school of humility. To allow yourself to be purified. To take up that risk of following our Blessed Mother, who wants to lead us to her Son. It's really important, and as you do that, as you're purified, as you allow God to work on you, to purify you, you will see Him more. You will understand Him more. That's really, really, really important, and that's kind of the message I'm giving to people. I want a personal relationship with Christ. Be like Christ. Act like Christ. Do what Christ asks of you. Read the Gospels. Go to confession. You will meet Him there in that mystery of the sacrament of confession. You will meet Christ in persona Christi. Receive Him worthily in the Eucharist. Go to adoration. Allow yourself to be purified. Be with Him. Enter that school of humility. Deny yourself. And this sometimes is is not easy. Sometimes people are saying, "I'm frustrated. I don't know how to know God more. I don't know how to do this." And then you say, "Well, come to a prayer group." No, I don't want to go to that prayer group. No, it doesn't suit me. I'm not interested in that. I said, "Oh, okay. Well, if it's Christ is there to help us." If we allow ourselves to be helped, and that's what I'm saying. We have the lives of the saints that bear witness to this. How did Saint Francis of Assisi have that personal relationship with Christ? By giving everything to Him, to allow himself to be purified by Christ, to become like Him. We have to be confronted by that divine love, which sometimes takes time. Allow yourself to be purified. So that's one meditation that somebody might help you. I don't know if it's too dense. Let me know in the comments. Some of that was by Valentin Tomberg. He's a Russian who converted to Catholicism, and sometimes some of his reflections are very good, and he quotes a lot of St. John of the Cross in his writing. So maybe of some interest to you. But I suppose we have to be challenged by this school of humility, because in there we encounter Christ. We're led in there by Mary, and in there we encounter Christ. Allow yourself to know Christ and have that personal relationship with Christ. Anyway, God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.